Jake Paul, Gervonta Tank Davis, the fight is in jeopardy, and it's for a reason that I think you all could believe, but maybe can't believe is happening again. This fight is only 2.5 weeks from going on. November 14th is the date. We are supposed to think that Jake Paul and Gervonta Davis are going to be fighting on Netflix, but not so fast, my friend. There's another, yes, I said another domestic abuse allegation against Gervonta Davis, and that may either destroy, postpone, change.
Jake Paul versus Gervonta Tank Davis is suddenly not safe anymore. The fight is being reviewed after a new domestic abuse accusation against Tank. Promoters and Netflix are checking options, and the whole matchup could be delayed or even scrapped if this sticks. And then this came out from Chris Mannix, and it made the whole thing look way more serious. He tweeted, "Netflix and reps for Jake Paul have been exploring potential replacements for Gervonta Davis." Sources familiar with the situation told at SI Now, Paul Davis, scheduled for November 14th, is in limbo after new allegations of domestic violence against Davis. That tweet basically says the people behind the show are already planning for a world where Tank doesn't fight. That's not rumor level anymore. That's production level. It means they don't want to cancel the date, but they also can't risk a main event getting pulled at the last minute. It also tells us the allegations are creating real pressure behind the scenes, not just headlines. Now it becomes a race. Can Tank's side calm this down before Netflix locks in someone else? And if a replacement comes in, does the fight still feel big enough for November 14th? This is where the whole card can flip in one move, and the boxing pros are reacting to it. Bisping saw the reports about Netflix checking backup opponents after Tank's domestic violence allegation, and he didn't like how the whole thing was set up from day one.
And I am seeing reports online that Jake Paul might be fighting Francis Ngannou, which is just absolutely bloody ridiculous. If you know the situation, it was supposed to be boxing Gervonta Tank Davis, a man that weighs 133 pounds or 135. Regardless, it's a man that is way smaller than Jake Paul. So that is just ridiculous, and I've given my thoughts on that before anyway. But now it turns out that Gervonta Davis has some allegations about domestic abuse. I don't know too much about the situation, but apparently Netflix have pulled the plug on that fight. It says, here's a tweet I'm reading from Mike Coppinger. As reported, Jake Paul's return could shift to December, with the November 14th Netflix exhibition in jeopardy due to the latest allegations against Gervonta Davis. Sources tell Ring Magazine that December 12th and the 19th are possibilities, right? And here are the potential opponents: Nate Diaz or Francis Ngannou.
He's basically saying this whole thing just swung from Jake versus a 135 ERR to Jake maybe versus monsters like Ngannou, and that shows how unstable the matchup was from the start. He points out Netflix won't keep funding fights that look too manufactured. Fans spot it. What he's really pressing is, if Jake wants to be taken seriously, fight people your size or bigger. And because the Tank fight blew up over allegations, it exposes the risk of chasing names instead of proper opponents. That's why he says real credit only comes when you take real danger, and he leaves it open. If Jake actually takes a real heavyweight or a real boxer his size, then respect. Bisping heard the same thing fans heard. Tank's fight is in limbo. Netflix is exploring replacements, and suddenly Jake's name is being thrown next to Francis Ngannou. That jump didn't make sense to him.
We know that Jake Paul has been out there and he's typically taking on people that are way older than him, like Mike Tyson, who's 58, Anderson Silva, who was way past his prime, people like Nate Diaz, who were way smaller. Gervonta Davis really did take the piss. I mean, that was just the craziest shout ever. To go from fighting Gervonta Davis, way smaller, to now boxing Francis Ngannou. I mean, listen, if he does it, fair play. But I just call #1 bull on this brother, because I don't see this happening. No.
This is #1 bull.
I just don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. Nate Diaz, yeah, 100%. I mean, he beat him once already. I'm sure Nate Diaz would love to get another big payday, because obviously boxing on Netflix and going up against Jake Paul, given his success, given the name that he has, and given the magnitude of his events, Nate Diaz will get paid an absolute fortune once again.
He points out that name-dropping giants is easy. Signing is the hard part. He reminds everyone Jake's usual pattern is older or smaller guys, so this sudden "I'll fight Francis" stuff sounds more like noise than a real plan. What he's really saying is, if Jake actually does it, fair play, that's a real risk. But until then, it's just headline talk. Nate Diaz, on the other hand, makes total sense. Money, story, rematch. That's why he keeps the tone sharp. He's calling it out, but also saying, prove me wrong. When reports started saying the November 14th Netflix date could move to December and Nate Diaz or Francis were being mentioned, Bisping called out the pattern. Jake's team loves using huge names to stay in the news.
We know that it wasn't too long ago Jake Paul was talking about boxing Anthony Joshua, and that never came to fruition. There's absolutely no way he would box Anthony Joshua. If he did, if he was to do something like that, whether it be Anthony Joshua or Francis Ngannou, I'd give him his props, I'd give him his credit, and you never know. Maybe he would do it just for the clout, because in many ways it would be, sorry about the airport notifications, it would be, you know, an admirable thing to do, and it will be Jake Paul taking on somebody bigger.
He explains that using big heavyweight names keeps Jake in the news, even if the fights are never close to being done. He says if Jake really fought someone like AJ or Francis, fighters would give him real respect because that's actual danger. Right now, it feels more like clout hunting than real matchmaking. He also says sometimes fighters do a wild matchup just to shock everyone, so he's not ruling it out 100%. Still, he tells fans to watch the actions, not interviews. If Jake ever walks in there with a huge puncher in his prime, that's the day the whole sport has to talk about it. Once it sounded like Netflix had to rethink the card because of Tank's domestic abuse issue, Bisping used it to make his main point. This is what happens when you build a big show around a much smaller guy.
Jake Paul losing the Gervonta Davis fight, which I have no sympathy for. That's what you get, you know. He wasn't to know that Gervonta Davis was going to get, I don't know what the case is, arrested or have accusations for domestic abuse against him. And again, if I'm misspeaking there, I apologize because I don't know all the situation. But that's what you get for going up against someone that is 135 pounds. I always say this, and I know it's a broken record, and I'm repeating myself at this point. If you do that, you're not a fighter.
He makes it clear he's not celebrating the domestic abuse part. He's saying the matchup was bad from the start. If you build a main event on a guy 2 or 3 weight classes smaller, you're already playing with fire. That's why fans don't feel bad for Jake now, because it looked like a cherry pick. He repeats his old line, fight people your size, and you won't have this problem. And now that Netflix might move the date, it shows how fragile these made-for-streaming fights are. One problem with the opponent and the whole card wobbles. After that, Bisping doubled down on what a real main event should look like, especially if Netflix is paying and the whole world is watching.
As a fighter, you go into the octagon or the ring and you don't know what's going to happen. Sure, you can have confidence, you can believe in yourself, but you truly don't know. And a lot of my fights, I went in there and I was outmatched. You know, I was never the best wrestler. I was never the strongest guy. I certainly wasn't the best athlete. I could hardly kick a ball when I was a kid, for crying out loud. But you work your ass off and you give it your best shot and you believe in yourself and you go in there and you're kind of nervous and you're scared. But that's the thrill. That's the thrill of victory. There's no thrill in beating someone where it's such a manufactured situation that it's almost impossible.
He says real fighters sign knowing they can lose, get out-muscled, or get hurt, and they still do it. That unknown is the thrill. He contrasts that with fights that look too safe, because fans can tell when everything is tilted to one side. He pushes Jake to take a matchup where he can actually lose, not just look good, because when you beat someone you were supposed to beat, nobody talks. But when you beat someone bigger, stronger, or more experienced, that's when the win actually matters. That's the level he wants Jake to reach. And when people brought up Jake suing folks who say his fights are fixed right in the middle of this Tank chaos, Bisping said that's not even the main issue.
Now we know Jake Paul's suing people that says his fights are fixed. I don't think his fights are fixed, but they are, as I say, set up in such a situation that it's almost impossible to win.
He says he doesn't think they're fixed. He thinks they're built to make Jake win. That's a big difference. When you keep picking older legends or smaller guys, of course, fans are going to question it. And now, with the Tank fight falling apart, the pattern is even easier to see. He warns that if Jake wants long-term respect, he has to stop relying on matchmaking and start relying on risk. He also says fans are getting smarter. They know when a fight has real danger and when it doesn't. And that's that's why this Tank mess might actually push Jake into a real fight next. The WADE concept also jumped on this because once you hear domestic violence allegation and fight might be off, it stops being just boxing talk. It becomes business talk, PR talk, Netflix talk.
This is gonna get a little more interesting than I previously thought. I thought it would be a bit of a mismatch, a bit of a, boxing experience to Gervonta Davis, Jake bringing the size and power, and we're gonna get one of these stalemates where no one wants to take a real risk and both guys are gonna get paid. Turns out no guy may get paid, or Gervonta Davis might be kicked off the card because we have a new, not champion, a new domestic violence abuse allegation against Gervonta Davis. There's been a lot of allegations against Tank, and some of those have been dropped, and others have not really been pursued, and you don't really know what's what behind the scenes with people, but when things like this happen over and over, I think this is his 4th or maybe 5th allegation of domestic abuse, you kind of start to have to look at the person that's being accused of such and go, why do you keep ending up in these situations? And the way it's described, we've even seen Tank do some of the things already on camera.
He points out that this wasn't supposed to be a hard fight for Jake. It was supposed to be a flashy one. And now the whole thing might collapse because of Tank's own history. He says when a name keeps coming up in these kinds of cases, promoters start to panic even if nothing is proven yet. He also notes fans are now asking the same question. Why is it always Tank? And that's bad for a main event. On top of that, he says Netflix can't sell a big show with a guy who keeps getting hit with the same type of story. That's why he thinks Tank could actually be pulled, not just warned. And if that happens, Jake has to find a new dance partner fast. Later, WADE goes even harder on the pattern. Not just this case, but the fact that Tank keeps getting dragged back into the same kind of trouble even when he's at the top.
Tank seems to find himself in these situations, or, be the perpetrator potentially in some of these situations over and over and over. And as much as I love Tank as a boxer, as much as I think he's one of the most talented boxers, one of the most skilled guys in the sport itself, he is a massive, massive screw up. I mean, unbelievably a massive screw up for the guy with his amount of talent, with his amount of popularity and eyeballs that drift to him in this sport, a true potential star in this sport. To have these types of issues over and over, when you talk about changing your life and not being a violent person anymore and not wanting to box and raise your kids and do this, and again, I'm not even trying to do the personal stuff, but how do you keep finding yourselves in these situations? After an allegation earlier this year and now another one. If it was 1 or 2, I could start to go, okay, well, some people are plotting on him, whatever, that can happen. But this is just too much of a coincidence when things are happening over and over and over again. He is just a complete screw up. He had $50 million on the line, and potentially we're not even going to see the fight now.
He says it's painful because Tank is crazy talented, but talent doesn't protect the event if you become a PR problem. He stresses that platforms like Netflix don't want to be defending a fighter every few months because of offering issues. He also says fans will support you through one situation, maybe 2. But when it becomes 4, 5, 6, people start to believe it. That's where sponsors get nervous and cards get changed. He reminds viewers that there was real money on the table for this fight, and Tank might have blown it himself, and that's why he calls it one of the most avoidable messes in boxing this year. Then he breaks down the business side, the civil suit, the streaming partner, and Jake's own brand, all getting pulled into something they didn't start.
This is why, when you open the civil lawsuit, when you look at companies like a Netflix or an MVP or partners or brands or sponsors that want to be involved with this type of event, do you think they're going to be okay with a guy that repeatedly, not in the past, because Mike Tyson had allegations and ended up being charged for very severe, we'll just say it was rape back in his day, and he went to prison for it. This recent, when you're doing something like that or alleged to be doing something like that, and you have a history of those allegations, and we have a history of seeing the physical, just call it what it is, battery that you can put on females outside of the ring, I don't think that's something that Netflix is wanting to be a part of at that point. And I think that even Jake, who was, and not even really clowning, but being like, you're a domestic abuser, on stage to Gervonta Davis, like talking about putting his hands on women, I don't know if Jake wants to be involved with somebody like that. Yes.
He explains that once a fighter has an active domestic violence situation, companies start asking, do we really want our logo next to this guy? He says Mike Tyson could survive stuff like that back then, but the media world is different now. Sponsors can leave in one day. He also says Jake talking about Tank's past on stage now kind of backfires because it puts Jake in the same headline. That's why, in his view, MVP and Netflix might prefer to quietly switch opponents instead of fighting this in public. He makes it clear this isn't about who's tougher, it's about who's safe to put on a global card. And right now, with this new allegation, Tank doesn't look safe for business. Carl Froch looked at the whole thing, the lawsuit, the weight gap, the Netflix part, and said what a lot of old school boxing people are thinking. This isn't a clean main event anymore.
So, the fight between Jake Paul and Gervonta Davis at the minute is in limbo. We don't know if the fight's going to be happening. I mean, I wasn't too excited about this fight anyway. I think it's a joke, but I'll get into that in a minute. So here's what we know so far. Davis is now facing a lawsuit in Miami from his ex, accusing him of battery, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and emotional distress. I mean, this does not look good. And he's had previous with his partner. Hands on women, I just can't agree with. It's just terrible. And it's so bad for boxing when a fighter is being accused of putting. I mean, that's my personal opinion on men going anywhere near women in an aggressive manner. It's just wrong.
He basically says once you bring in charges like battery, kidnapping, and false imprisonment, the fight stops being about sport. He points out that Tank has had issues like this before, so people will naturally believe it quicker this time. He also says it reflects badly on boxing when a headline fighter is being talked about for hitting women instead of winning belts. On top of that, he makes it personal. He flat out says men shouldn't be putting hands on women, full stop. That's why he thinks the matchup should be paused until things are clear, because right now it just looks ugly for the sport. Then Froch goes at the actual matchup, not just the allegation, and calls it what fans were calling it online, a mismatch dressed up as a mega fight.
Jake Paul, Gervonta Davis. Joke, absolute clown world. Really fitting for fake Paul, the clown, because it's a clown show. You're putting him in with somebody who's 100 pounds lighter. I mentioned the weight disparity before. Getting on for 7 stone. It's a weight-governed sport. It should not be happening. He's too small, Gervonta Davis, against the big Jake Paul, who's in the gym a lot, training. Apparently he's fit and strong and he has a go and he can fight a little bit, which I disagree with because I don't think he can. He might be able to fight a little.
He says Jake versus Tank was always a clown show because of the huge size difference. He reminds everyone that boxing is a weight-governed sport for a reason, and this one ignored that. He doesn't buy the idea that Jake is just doing it for entertainment. He thinks it was a setup to make Jake look good against a smaller star. He also questions how serious Jake's boxing level really is if he keeps going after guys way lighter than him. And now that Tank has legal trouble too, Froch thinks it just proves the fight wasn't built on sporting merit. That's why he calls it Clown World. After that, Froch leans all the way into the domestic violence part and talks like a dad, not like a former world champion.
But these allegations against Gervonta Davis, they're very serious allegations. Anybody that's laying hands on women needs to be shut down straight away. They need to be, for me, they need to be locked up and the key thrown away. You shouldn't touch women. They're not there to be touched and have their hands laid on them. I've got 2 daughters. I've got my wife, my mother. Anybody out there who's close relationship to women knows you do not lay your hands on women ever. Don't touch them. And if you do, you should be prisoned. As simple as that. That's my take on it. It's totally out of it. It's really serious. Tank needs to get a grip and stop doing what he's doing because he's got previous. This is all alleged, don't forget. It's all allegations. So we're not trying to convict anybody here on Froch on Fighting. We're just pointing out the facts. He's been accused of all the serious allegations from earlier. It's not good enough, and
he says anyone who puts their hands on women should be dealt with straight away. No excuses. He makes it clear these are still allegations, but he also says Tank has had too many similar headlines. He brings up his own family to show why this kind of story hits different. He also warns that fans won't keep supporting fighters who keep ending up in these cases. And for someone with Tank's talent, he says it's just sad to see. That's why he thinks Tank needs to fix his life before stepping into big showcase events again. Finally, Froch looks at the whole picture, the lawsuit, the weight, the Netflix brand, and says the most blunt thing of all, the fight just shouldn't happen.
From the fight being made to the weight disparity, to Gervonta Davis being a wrong-un in terms of these allegations, the whole thing is just an absolute circus. And this fight really needs to stop. They can't carry on. They might be getting some publicity and some press, and they say there's no such thing as bad press, but this is bad. This needs to not go ahead. Netflix, I can't see him putting their name to it. Boxing shouldn't be involved in it at all. But to be honest, it's got nothing to do with boxing because it is a clown show exhibition. But the fight should not be happening, and I sincerely hope for boxing's sake.
He says yes, it's getting views and clicks, but not every kind of attention is good attention. He doesn't think Netflix will want its name tied to a domestic violence story and a mismatch at the same time. He also says this isn't even real boxing, it's an exhibition sold as boxing, so the sport shouldn't have to take the hit for it. In his view, canceling it now actually protects boxing, and he ends on that. Some fights create buzz, this one creates problems, so stop it before it goes any further. Showbiz the adult looked at it from both angles, the fight business and the real life part, and he said what a lot of people were thinking. If Jake is already hunting for a replacement, then they're not confident Tank survives this allegation.
The fight may be canceled. It's a civil suit. From my understanding, and I don't want to, confuse you guys or misinform you guys. I didn't look into it much, but from my understanding, it's a civil suit. It probably could turn into worse. A woman who is a waitress at a club. So I don't know all the details. You guys to check the details, but Jake Paul is looking for a replacement for Gervonta Tank Davis, man. And
he explains that once a civil suit like this shows up, streaming platforms and promoters start protecting the card first, not the fighter. He also says the details still aren't 100% clear, but the fact that Jake's side is moving tells you they're taking it seriously. He points out that Tank has had past situations, so this one lands heavier, and he reminds viewers this was supposed to be an easy money event. Now it might not even happen. That's why he thinks the headline can flip at any moment, and if a new opponent comes in, the whole storyline changes. After that, he slows it down and talks about the bigger problem. I mean, not just Tank, but fighters in general who live in fight mode 24/7.
It's not canceled quite yet, all right? But Jake Paul is looking for a replacement, and that's the latest news. Damn. My take on Gervonta. I don't have much because I wasn't there. I don't know everything that happened. And of course, I'm not going to jump on one side or the other, but I'm going to say this as a general statement. I do think boxers, if the new boxing league, TKO, or if anyone who gives a shit enough, I think fighters, I've been saying this for a while, should have like mandatory therapy sessions, because fighters are taught all day, every day since kids, okay? They're homeschooled early, they're removed from general population, really learning those skills in just a public school system on how to deal with people, and they're taught on how to respond to their ops physically by fighting, using their fists, all right? And they're taught that repetitively, which is perfect for being a warrior. But then you're going to have to decompress when it comes to dealing in just a normal social setting.
He says most boxers are trained to respond with force, not with calm, and then people get shocked when that leaks into real life. He brings up the idea that big shows, new leagues, and even Netflix-level events should include mental health or therapy support for fighters. Not because they're bad people, but because they're raised to fight. He also says he's not picking sides in Tank's case. He wasn't there. He just thinks this won't be the last time we see a story like this if boxing keeps ignoring the human side. And he warns, if fighters keep getting into these situations, brands will start walking away. Then he goes into problem-solving mode. Like, okay, we keep seeing these allegations. What can boxing actually do about it?
And Gervonta, is guilty of any of this. I'm just talking about generally speaking, because we've had these situations, allegations and stuff like this time and time again, especially with what we've learned about CTE and stuff like that. I'm just saying we rev up these fighters to handle problems with their fists. I think there should be support and resources allocated with monies, especially when I'm just thinking of how to make the situation better. All right, that's all. I'm just trying to problem solve, but I'm just saying, since fighters have to pay fees and stuff like that, maybe there can be a fund to help with these fighters, as far as when it comes to their medical treatment. You know how after a fight, they go and they go to the hospital and they get checked medically, right? Maybe there should be one for, just mental health therapy also provided after a fight or something. I'm trying to come up with some sort of solution, and I don't think that's a bad idea.
He suggests that just like fighters get checked physically after a bout, they should get checked mentally too. He says a small part of the event money could go into a fund for counseling, rehab, or even CTE related support. He points out we already know head trauma and aggression are linked, so pretending it's random doesn't help. He also says if the sport offers help, fewer fighters end up in headlines for the wrong reason, and that's better for everyone. The promoters, streaming platforms, and the fighter himself. That's why he thinks this Tank situation should be a wake-up call, not just another canceled main event. So right now it's simple. The fight is not dead, but it's not safe either. Jake Paul versus Gervonta Tank Davis was already a weird matchup because of the size, and now this civil suit makes it even harder for Netflix and the promoters to stand behind it. When a fighter keeps getting pulled into the same kind of allegations, companies start thinking, is this the guy we want as the face of our event? That's the real problem here. If Tank clears it fast, maybe they keep him. If it drags, they almost have to swap him out. Now, what do you think? Do you think Gervonta should still be allowed to fight while this civil suit is going on? If Netflix pulls Tank, who should Jake fight? Nate Diaz, Francis Ngannou, or someone closer to boxing like a cruiserweight? Does this situation prove Jake has to start fighting guys his own size now? And if Tank keeps getting these cases, should big platforms just stop booking him for a while?